Smoke curled from the edge of the projection table, a thin white thread rising toward the ceiling vents before vanishing. Someone had slammed a coffee mug down hard enough to crack its handle, and now the bitter smell mixed with the hot electronics of the command bunker. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Granger stood with her arms folded tight against her chest, her nails digging into the sleeves of her uniform. Every set of eyes in the room was turned toward the towering hologram in the center. It was not a council broadcast this time. It was the enemy himself. The Valdari commander loomed in the projection, his scaled jaw glittering with golden etchings, each line marking a campaign he had won. His voice rattled through the speakers, heavy and precise, as if every word had been measured in arrogance before leaving his throat. 783 worlds silenced. 783 armadas crushed. And you, Earth, will be the 784th. Not even your bones will remain. He leaned forward until his enormous reptilian eye filled the holographic feed. Behind him, rows of his officers stood like statues, armored in black plates, their posture screaming certainty. In the bunker, nobody moved. The youngest tech officer swallowed hard, the sound loud in the silence. Another muttered a curse under his breath and immediately regretted it. Rachel finally let her arms fall. She stepped closer to the image, her boots clicking softly on the concrete floor. "He's enjoying this," she muttered, low but not low enough. General Marcus Ellery, standing just a few feet behind her, spoke for the first time. His tone was even, controlled, but there was a rough edge under it that Rachel knew well. "Of course he is. The Valdari never announce without a performance. They want fear to sink in before the first shot's even fired." The Valdari commander raised a hand in the projection, and with the sweep of a clawed finger, a new image appeared behind him. It was Earth. Their Earth. The blue oceans, the scattered continents, the thin veil of atmosphere. Around it, the hologram painted swarms of Valdari ships closing in like vultures circling fresh prey. "This world will be erased," he said, his lips curling into something that was not a smile but was meant to be worse. "When we are finished, there will be no wreckage left of your ships, no survivors of your cities. You will be forgotten as if you never existed." Rachel exhaled through her nose, steadying herself. She had grown up with her brother on the edge of Kentucky farmland, where the only battles were over inheritance rights and the worst enemy was a dry summer. He had died in a war that was supposed to unite humanity under one flag, a war that had taken too long to end. Now here she was, staring at an alien face telling her Earth itself would follow him into dust. The projection flickered, then cut out. Silence rushed into the room, thick and heavy. Nobody spoke until the general stepped forward. His shoulders looked like carved stone, his hair cut brutally short, his jaw set in a way that told everyone the discussion was over before it began. "They'll be here in 6 hours, he said. 200 ships for the first strike. Recon testing our defenses. Don't mistake them for anything less than killers." Someone in the back whispered, 6 hours? And the disbelief in his voice made a few others shift uncomfortably. Rachel turned toward the general. "And if we survive the test?" Ellery's gaze found hers, holding for a moment that felt longer than it was. "Then the real war starts." The hum of machinery filled the silence that followed, steady and indifferent. A few officers bent back over their consoles, trying to hide the fact that their hands were trembling. Rachel pulled her hair back into a rough tie, her jaw tightening. Fear was there, crawling up her throat, but it was tangled with something sharper. The Valdari thought they had already written the ending. They thought Earth was just another number to add to their tally. She turned back to the blank projection field. "They're wrong," she said quietly. Ellery didn't correct her. He didn't remind her how outnumbered they were or how the council had already counted them out. He only adjusted his gloves and murmured low enough for her to catch. "Let them laugh. They have no idea what kind of grave they just dug for themselves." The lights dimmed slightly as the system recalibrated, a small flicker across the concrete walls. Rachel stared at the empty projection, the ghost of the Valdari commander's voice still clinging to her ears. The first wave was coming. And whatever Earth was hiding, she was about to see it. The first hour passed in the kind of quiet that ate at nerves more than any bombardment could. The bunker felt colder than before, even though the ventilation system whispered the same recycled air through its vents. Every screen showed the same incoming data. Valdari ships breaking formation and sliding toward orbit, black wedges moving against the stars in flawless lines. Rachel leaned on the edge of her console, her eyes locked on the feed. The alien vessels glowed faintly from the energy coursing through their hulls, every contour sharpened by the pale reflection of Earth's atmosphere. They moved like predators in deep water, circling without effort, waiting for the right moment to strike. Technicians spoke in low bursts, trading readings and numbers that meant little outside their context. Someone's hands shook so hard the keys clicked unevenly. Nobody said it, but the entire bunker felt the weight of watching what might be their planet's last sunrise. 200 confirmed, Ellery said from the center of the room. His voice was flat, a statement of fact, but his jaw worked as if the words tasted bitter. This is only the beginning. The comms officer beside Rachel swallowed audibly. Sir, feeds from the council relay stations are fully active. They're watching this in real time. Rachel almost laughed at that, but the sound stuck in her throat. The council wasn't just watching. They were waiting. Waiting to see Earth burn, waiting to see the Valdari prove themselves invincible again. Humanity's survival was just theater for them, and the tickets had already been sold. The attack should have begun with orbital bombardments, fire raining down in sheets of white-hot metal. That was the Valdari way, swift and merciless, breaking a world's spirit before its armies could mobilize. Rachel braced herself for it, but the moment dragged on and no fire came. Instead, a single transmission cut through the room. Alien voices, sharp and guttural, overlapping in a way that sounded like knives scraping steel. It wasn't a declaration. It was a command. And then the screens went black. Rachel straightened instantly. What the hell? Technicians scrambled, rerouting systems, cursing under their breath. Ellery barked orders, demanding diagnostics, but the feeds remained dark. The entire invasion force had vanished from the monitors in the span of a blink. Jamming? One officer asked, frantic. Negative. They're gone from every array, even civilian telescopes. All visual contact is cut. Rachel's pulse thudded against her throat. That's impossible. 200 ships don't just disappear. A sudden hiss snapped through the speakers, a fractured burst of noise that clawed at her ears. For half a second, the screens flashed with static, then resolved into a distorted frame. Rachel caught it, just one frame just long enough. A ripple. Like water disturbed by a stone. A shimmer across the black of space that bent light in a way no natural phenomenon could. And then it was gone. The feed cut again. Silence settled over the room, heavy as lead. Technicians looked at one another, lost for words. No wreckage, no escape signatures, no explosions. Nothing remained above Earth at all. Ellery's voice finally broke the quiet. Get me long-range scans. Now. Minutes crawled by. Data trickled in, each report identical to the last. Empty orbit. No trace of debris. No trace of Valdari ships. It was as if the fleet had been erased. The comms officer's voice cracked when he finally spoke. General, the council is demanding an explanation. They want to know what we used. Ellery didn't answer. He stood perfectly still, his eyes locked on the dead screens. Rachel studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the small twitch at the corner of his jaw. He knew something. She replayed that single frozen frame in her mind, the ripple, the distortion that looked too deliberate to be natural. It wasn't alien. She was certain of it. General, she said quietly, that wasn't them. Ellery turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. His expression was unreadable, but the lack of denial said more than words. The bunker's silence deepened, but outside its walls the galaxy erupted. Council stations flooded with confusion and fear. Worlds that had only ever seen the Valdari win were now staring at their first loss, and no one could explain how it happened. The Valdari commander's broadcast returned hours later, fury carved across his scaled face. His arrogance was gone, replaced by something rawer, uglier. You dare. You think this is a victory. This is theft. You will pay. He cut the feed before anyone could respond. Ellery dismissed the room. Officers and technicians filed out quietly, some whispering, some too stunned to speak at all. Only Rachel stayed behind, rooted in place, staring at the blank screens as if they might come back to life. She finally spoke into the emptiness, her voice low. 200 ships. Gone. And no wreckage. What the hell are we hiding? Ellery didn't answer. He simply walked toward the exit, the echo of his boots fading into the concrete. For the first time in her career, Rachel felt the hairs on her arms rise not from fear of the enemy, but from fear of her own side. And above them, in the quiet void, the galaxy waited for the second wave. The galaxy should have been celebrating the Valdari's 800th victory. Instead, it was whispering about Earth. News feeds across neutral stations replayed the empty space above the planet, the silence that followed the first assault. Commentators stammered through explanations, some insisting Earth had deployed illegal council-forbidden weapons, others suggesting the Valdari had staged the loss to justify an even bloodier campaign. But the one thing nobody could deny was this: the undefeated had been defeated. And by humans of all people. Inside the Colorado bunker, Rachel sat at her console listening to fragments of intercepted council chatter. The voices of alien delegates overlapped in confusion, disbelief, and a thin thread of fear. 200 ships do not vanish. Where is the wreckage? Where are the survivors? This is a human trick. It must be. Rachel rubbed her eyes with her palms, exhaustion pressing behind them. A trick, they called it. If it was one she didn't understand, and she was wearing the same uniform as the men who had pulled it off. General Ellery entered the room, the officers snapping straight as if the air itself stiffened around him. He didn't look at anyone as he strode to the center. The Valdari are regrouping, he said flatly. This was not their full hand. Expect retaliation within days, not weeks. Rachel asked the question everyone else was too afraid to. Do we have a plan? Ellery finally turned to her, his gaze heavy, his silence even heavier. We're alive. That's the plan for now. The room stayed quiet after that. The retaliation came sooner than expected. Less than 48 hours later, the Valdari broadcast again. This time, their commander's arrogance had sharpened into something colder, something surgical. Your world will not escape twice. We come with 600. You will not hide behind tricks. We will strip you from your skies, your seas, your soil. Behind his image, Rachel counted the outlines of his fleet, 6 times the number of the first wave. They were done toying. The council opened channels to Earth, demanding assurances, demanding transparency, but Washington responded with the same line: we have nothing to declare. Rachel sat in the bunker, watching the fleet draw closer. The same dread settled over the room as before, but it was different this time. The Valdari were furious, which meant they would come harder, faster, with no patience for performance. The officers whispered among themselves, their voices carrying fragments of questions nobody dared to ask outright. If Earth had some hidden weapon, why wasn't it public? Why were they kept in the dark? What else was buried under the concrete they worked in? Rachel remembered the ripple she had seen, that impossible distortion across the feed. She could not let it go. Her gut told her it wasn't alien. It was theirs. Humanity's. Ellery stood at the command platform, watching the screens as the black wedges of the Valdari fleet slipped into orbit like closing jaws. Here they come, he said quietly. And then it began. The first salvo of the Valdari assault never landed. In the blink of an eye, half their fleet tore out of existence. One moment 600 ships stretched across the orbital arc, the next only 300 remained. No fire, no debris, just silence. But unlike the first wave, this time the Valdari managed to transmit. Rachel's console screamed with overlapping distress signals, alien voices crashing into one another in panic. She heard them stutter through words in their own tongue, voices breaking apart under static. Shields failing. Unknown strike, unknown strike. They see us, they see us. Entire wing gone, nothing left, nothing. The signals cracked apart, dying one by one. On the bunker screens, ships flickered out of sight as if pulled beneath invisible waves. And then, silence. Rachel stared at the remaining Valdari fleet, her breath caught in her throat. 300 ships hung in orbit, scattered and breaking formation, their once perfect discipline shattered by fear. She had seen plenty of soldiers rattle in her time, but never like this. The council stations went mad, chatter spilling across intercepted feeds. The galaxy was no longer just confused, it was afraid. Not weapons, one delegate cried. Predators. Nothing leaves wreckage. This is erasure. This is worse. Ellery stood unmoving, his eyes locked on the dying screens. Rachel finally tore her gaze from the chaos to look at him. You knew, she said softly. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer. The Valdari regrouped, desperate to reassert their dominance. Their commander's voice returned, strained but burning with rage. This is not war. This is theft. You will not erase us. We will burn your world to ash. The feed cut. The bunker fell quiet once more, but this time the silence carried weight. No one was asking if the Valdari would return. The only question was how much of Earth would survive when they did. Rachel leaned back, her arms folded tight. The ripples, the erasure, the way Ellery refused to speak. It wasn't just a secret weapon. It was something worse. And she wasn't sure anymore whether it frightened the Valdari more than it frightened her. The facility was buried so deep beneath the Rockies that Rachel's ears popped 3 times during the descent. She rode in silence inside the armored elevator, the hum of machinery around her louder than any conversation could be. General Ellery stood beside her, arms folded, face carved into something unreadable. He hadn't told her why she was being brought here. He hadn't told her anything at all. When the doors finally opened, cold air rushed in. The chamber beyond wasn't like the command bunkers she knew. It was cathedral-like, vast, walls lined with cables thicker than her torso. In the center, a ring of structures circled a humming core of white-blue light, its glow so intense that Rachel's eyes watered before she could adjust. Engineers moved like ghosts between the consoles, their faces pale and their uniforms stripped of insignias. These weren't ordinary military staff. They were scientists or something more dangerous than scientists, people who built weapons no one wanted to admit existed. Ellery finally broke his silence. "You've seen what it does. You deserve to see what it is." Rachel kept her voice steady, though her chest tightened. "I saw ships vanish. I saw 200, then 300 more disappear like they were swallowed by nothing. That wasn't defense. That was—" She stopped herself, searching for a word she didn't have. "Erasure," Ellery finished. "That's what some call it. Matter displaced out of phase. Energy ripped through every atom and folded elsewhere. No wreckage. No survivors. Nothing left to study. Gone." Rachel turned back to the core, its light pulsing like the heartbeat of something alive. "You built this." He shook his head once. "Not me. Humanity. Years of panic after the first council contact. They smiled at us, called us interesting, primitive, unstable. But the moment we realized how outnumbered we were, projects like this started. Deep black. Off the books. Buried so far that even our allies wouldn't suspect. For 20 years we've hidden this thing. Waiting." Rachel exhaled slowly, her thoughts a blur. Waiting for what? To erase entire civilizations. Ellery's eyes hardened. To survive them. The words landed heavy, leaving no space for argument. Yet Rachel couldn't shake the sense that the ground beneath her boots was suddenly thinner, weaker. If Earth was defending itself with something that erased fleets without trace, what kind of future were they building? Before she could ask, alarms screamed through the chamber. The sound hit like knives in the skull, red strobes washing over the engineers as they bolted to their stations. An officer ran up, breathless. "General, the Valdari have entered orbit. The third wave. 1,000 ships confirmed." Rachel's chest clenched. 1,000. More than twice the second assault. The Valdari weren't just here to win. They were here to annihilate. Ellery's jaw tightened. "Bring the array online." The engineers threw switches and slammed controls, the chamber filling with a rising hum that rattled the air. The core pulsed faster, its glow swelling until Rachel had to squint against it. "They'll push it too hard," she muttered, half to herself. Systems like this weren't built for. The array fired. The light from the core lanced upward through the facility's armored roof, vanishing into the sky. Rachel didn't see the strike itself, but the bunker's feeds showed it clearly. In orbit, 500 Valdari ships disappeared instantly, ripped out of existence as if they'd never been. But something went wrong. The chamber shook, not from the attack but from the array itself. Sparks rained down from the cables, consoles bursting in showers of glass and flame. Engineers screamed orders over one another as alarms drowned them out. Rachel grabbed the nearest railing, the vibration tearing through her bones. "What's happening?" One of the scientists shouted. "Feedback surge. The core's destabilizing, it's burning itself apart." On the screens, the remaining Valdari pressed forward, firing down at Earth for the first time. Bolts of plasma scorched against defense grids, tearing through orbital platforms. Civilian satellites shattered into flame. For the first time since this war began, Earth was bleeding. Rachel's throat tightened as she watched a satellite camera feed burn out in a spray of static. Cities below were still visible, lights flickering as power grids collapsed under the surge. Families she didn't know were huddling underground, praying this fight ended before the fire reached them. Ellery's voice cut through the chaos. "Granger. With me." He led her through the screaming chamber to a staircase spiraling down toward the core itself. Heat blasted up at them, scorching her skin even through the uniform. The array was failing, the heart of it pulsing like an unstable reactor seconds from bursting. "This is suicide," Rachel shouted over the roar. "Not if we stabilize it," Ellery growled. "You wanted to know what we were hiding. Congratulations. Now you get to save it." They plunged into the core chamber. Heat shimmered in the air, bending it like liquid. The machine's surfaces glowed red, its framework cracking under the force tearing through it. Engineers were already down here, some collapsed from the heat, others dragging cables with desperate hands. Rachel forced herself forward, her breath searing in her lungs. She didn't know this technology, not really, but she knew systems. She had been pulling machines back from the brink her entire career. "Shut down the secondary lines," she yelled at the nearest conscious engineer. "You're overloading the dampers, cut them or we're all fried." The engineer hesitated, wide-eyed, but obeyed. Sparks burst as the lines severed, the hum of the core shifting slightly, less erratic but still deadly. Ellery was already tearing panels open with his bare hands, sweat pouring down his face. "We buy it a minute, maybe two." Rachel dropped beside a console, her fingers flying across controls she only half understood. Numbers bled across the screens, energy readings spiking far beyond safe thresholds. "We can't hold this. It'll tear itself apart." "Then don't hold it," Ellery snapped. "Direct it." Her eyes widened. He was right. They couldn't contain it, but maybe they could aim it one last time. Her hands blurred across the controls, diverting what power she could. Warnings screamed at her from every panel, but she ignored them, forcing the system to channel the overload upward. The core screamed as it discharged. Light tore through the chamber, white and blinding, the sound of it a physical thing that rattled her teeth. And then silence. On the screens, the last of the Valdari fleet vanished. All 1,000 ships were gone. Nothing remained above Earth but the empty void. The chamber stilled, the core dimming to a pale blue flicker. Rachel collapsed to her knees, her lungs burning, her skin blistered. She heard distant voices, hands dragging her back, but she barely registered them. Above them, Earth had survived. But the array was broken, burned to its foundations. And for the first time, Rachel realized something she had not allowed herself to think before. If this weapon was the only reason humanity stood a chance, then their survival hung by a thread already fraying. Ellery crouched beside her, his face grim in the flickering light. "You bought us this day. But the Valdari won't stop. And the Council won't sit quiet either." Rachel's vision blurred, her body finally giving in to the heat and exhaustion. The last thing she heard before blacking out was Ellery's voice, low and grim. "They wanted wreckage. We gave them nothing. That terrifies them. But what should terrify us is knowing we can't stop using it now." The transmission chambers inside Earth Command had grown quiet. Every official, every officer, every engineer who had stayed behind to monitor the operation sat in that silence, the kind that made the air feel heavy. On the central display, a feed of the alien armada flickered. Wreckage should have been scattered, fire and debris should have been blooming across the void. Instead, the entire fleet had simply vanished. No trails, no radiation, no scraps drifting like cosmic dust. It was as though the armada had been erased from existence. Commander Evelyn Hart's throat was dry, her voice raspy as she finally asked, "Status report. Anyone give me something that makes sense?" A technician, pale under the glow of the monitors, shook his head. "No debris fields. No energy residues. Their fleet didn't explode. Just stopped registering. 1 second, 700 ships. The next, nothing." The room filled with whispers. Some officers muttered theories, others clutched at the hope that it meant complete victory. But Hart's gut twisted. She had seen real battles. She knew what destruction looked like. This was not destruction. This was erasure. In orbit, Captain Mason stared at the black void where the fleet had been. His crew shuffled around him, stunned, clinging to consoles as if searching for data that might anchor them back into reality. The youngest lieutenant spoke first, his voice cracking slightly. "Did we kill gods?" Mason's hand hovered over the armrest of his command chair. He did not answer. His instincts screamed that the aliens had not been killed, not in the way humans understood. Something had been pulled apart, unraveled. Whether it was the aliens' arrogance or their overconfidence in technology, the outcome felt stranger than any victory could. Hours later, the Galactic Council convened. For centuries, they had mocked humanity as a fledgling species, a reckless people who fought more among themselves than with the stars. Now, the chamber was filled with a nervous quiet. Representatives of worlds that had once been enslaved by the Armada leaned forward, eyes wide with hope, while those who had secretly funded or relied upon the Armada's dominance looked sickly pale. The Council's High Arbiter spoke at last. "Explain," his voice wavering. "Explain how you annihilated a fleet of that scale without leaving a trace." Earth's envoy, a middle-aged diplomat named Marcus Keene, had no clean answer. He had been chosen for his steadiness, but even he could not mask the unease that pressed at the back of his mind. "We didn't annihilate them. We defended ourselves and the outcome was what you see. If you're looking for a wreckage count, you won't find one. If you're hoping for trophies, there are none. They came to end us and they ended themselves. The chamber erupted in confusion, arguments rising in a dozen alien tongues. Some demanded proof of humanity's new weapons. Others swore that Earth had struck some forbidden bargain with powers beyond the Council's comprehension. A few simply stared at the human envoy in silence, fear written across every twitch of their features. When the chamber quieted, Keen leaned forward. His words were calm, but they carried an edge sharp enough to cut through the air. You all thought we were prey. You counted our scars, you laughed at our small wars, and you mistook survival for weakness. What you saw out there wasn't just a weapon. It was who we are. When pushed to the edge, we do not break. We adapt. We endure. And when the moment comes, we make sure the world knows we were here. The silence that followed was heavier than any applause could have been. Even the High Arbiter did not answer. Back on Earth, the mood was no less conflicted. Across cities and towns, people celebrated in the streets, yet whispers spread in private. The footage of the fleet's vanishing had already leaked. Scientists debated what truly happened. Some claimed humanity's experimental weapon had disrupted space itself, tearing the alien ships into particles too small to trace. Others insisted the aliens had triggered their own failsafe, preferring erasure over defeat. Mason, still orbiting Earth, watched the celebrations with a hollow expression. His crew laughed, embraced, and raised glasses, but he could not shake the unease that had rooted inside him. He replayed the battle again and again. The aliens had boasted of 783 victories before marching to Earth. They had crushed civilizations, burned planets, enslaved species. If they truly had a failsafe, why had they never used it before? Why only now? Late in the night, Hart joined him on the observation deck. She stood beside him, arms crossed. You're thinking the same thing I am. That it wasn't us, Mason muttered. That it wasn't just us, Hart corrected softly. Whatever erased them, it wanted us alive. That's the part nobody's ready to admit. Mason turned, his brow furrowed. So what do we tell the people? Hart let out a breath that fogged the glass in front of her. We tell them the truth. That we won. But between you and me, Mason, she paused, her eyes locked on the endless black of space. Something else was watching. And I don't know if it saved us or just marked us. Neither of them spoke after that. The silence hung, not as relief, but as a question that clawed at both of their minds. And far beyond Earth's orbit, in the quiet where the Armada had vanished, something shimmered faintly in the dark. A ripple, almost imperceptible, like a scar left on reality itself.